Hello, my name is Alfredo Salmon Mejage from Edukea Company. Welcome in this session to proceed with our last topic in Form 5 history, which is the political and economic development after independence in Tanzania. So, on the last session, we ended on looking on the different constitution which have been made and the different amendments that have been taken or made all at Friday in the permanent constitution of 1977 after the formation of CCM. And the various amendments have been made and brought some significance in the country of Tanzania. So let us see the various effects of the constitutional changes to the political development in Tanzania. It means that we are going to see the effects or what impacts of the constitution changes to the political in Tanzania. The first one is liberation from partial independence. Liberation from partial independence. The 1962 constitutional change liberated Tanzania from partial political independence. It means that, as you remember that I told you that the independence constitution was made or was giving the governor general the power to be the head of the state. So by that time Tanzania or Tanganyika by that time was under the supervision of the foreign domination under governor general. So but when there was another constitutional change that took place in 1962 when the Republican Constitution was made, the government or the Tanzanian country regained the full or complete independence, whereby the Tanzanian or Tanganyikan president Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere became the head of the state. So we can see that there was liberation from partial independence to complete independence, as the country was still under the control of the Queen of England, who was represented by the Governor General in the country. And the 1962 Constitution saw the establishment of the Constituent Assembly that introduced the post of president, who was a Tanzanian. So that was just the political development as resulted from the constitutional changes which have made. But the second one is introduction of Ujamaa. The 1967 change introduced a political ideology of Ujamaa or African socialism and self-reliance. This provided a political guideline in which the country's development would be attained. It means that there was introduction of Ujamaa. This was ideology or African socialism that was aiming at making Tanzania or Tanganyika by that time to be the country which will depend on itself and not abroad. That was brought the policy of self-reliance, socialism and self-reliance. That was brought by Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere as the president of the country. And this provided a political guideline in which the country's development would be attained. Ujamaa was one of the two important principles of Arusha Declaration. It means that after the Arusha Declaration or during Arusha Declaration, it is when Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere introduced or brought the introduction of Ujamaa and the self-reliance, or socialism and the self-reliance. It aimed at creating a truly socialistic state where the society was classless. It means that the main aim of introducing Ujamaa was to make a true socialist state which will not have classes in the country. And the Ujamaa emphasized the absence of exploitation of man by man. It means that African socialism or Ujamaa was emphasized much on the absence of exploitation between Tanzanian by Tanzania. The principle aimed at putting the major means of production under the control of peasants and the workers. It means that the principle aimed at putting the major means of production to be under the control of the peasants and the workers. All the major means of production to be controlled under the government and not private ownership. So this was another effect that led to the political development in Tanzania as a result of constitutional change. Another was the introduction of multi-party system, to mean that brought the introduction of multi-party system. The 1962 reintroduction of multi-party politics brought the openness of the government and created freedom of press, speech, and accountability of different actors in the political system of Tanzania. As we saw that there was the introduction of multi-party system whereby political parties were extended and brought the freedom of press, speech, and accountability of different actors in the political system of Tanzania. It would be noted that one of the reasons for the introduction of multi-party was the pressure from the donor community. It means that the reasons for introduction of multi-party was the pressure from the donor community or countries or Western countries. So these were the effects that led to the development of politics in Tanzania as a result of constitutional changes. So after there, let us see the economic development in Tanzania since independence. We have seen the political development in Tanzania since independence, so now we are going to see the economic development in Tanzania since independence. Since independence, Tanzania has tried different ways to achieve development, but in the world, the country is still finding it difficult to achieve real growth and development. It means since independence, the many attempts have made in order to try to make Tanzania achieve the growth and development, but there is some challenges which have been occurring or facing those attempts or strategies and methods. The following are the challenges of Tanzanian economic development. The following are the challenges which have been facing the attainance of the economic development in Tanzania. And the first challenge is inadequate capital. It means Tanzania after attaining the independence, there's been the problem of poor capital or lack of capital. It means that the capital is not enough for running different activities within the country. The absence of adequate capital is one of the crucial factors that have been hindering development in the region. African countries rely on loans given by the developed countries, but these loans have conditions attached and came in small trickles that's not able to support development in Africa. So it means that the inadequate capital in Tanzania has been the crucial factor that has been hindering the development in the region. And most of African countries are just relying on getting or seeking the financial assistance from the donor countries or developed countries. And that financial assistance that have been provided by the donor countries come up with the harsh conditions which made the African countries to open the room for those donor countries to come and invest to make their interest successful. So these the other conditions and just the price high interest rate in paying back the loans. So you can see that in one way or another, the country or the African country, specifically Tanzania, cannot achieve the economic development because of the burden of the loans or the debt, the burden of debt which must be paid to the developed countries. But the second one is poor transport system. Poor transport system. Existence of poor transport system, which were mainly concentrated in productive areas, led Tanzania to fail to achieve the goals of multi-party. The goals of the country. It means that the poor transport system which is present in the country means that the transportation system is just poor. So the transport sector is just facing by the different problems, and the revenue which could be collected from the transport sector is just low because the systems or networks of transport is just poor. So that's how Tanzania has been failing to achieve their economic development, or to achieve economic development because of the transport system to be poor. But another one is illiteracy. Illiteracy. High levels of illiteracy are one of the factors that have contributed significantly another problem that has been facing the economic development in Tanzania since independence is illiteracy, where high levels of illiteracy are one of the factors that have contributed significantly to the underdevelopment of Tanzania, because the most people of Tanzanian citizens are unskilled. So the colonial education system provided education to a few people along racial and religious lines, thus leaving the majority of the people illiterate. So low level of literacy led to the limited number of skilled people in Tanzania, which does not promote development. It means that the colonial education was provided to the minority, or a short number, or provided to the few people of Tanzania regarding on their racial and religious lines. So the majority of the people in Tanzania were left illiterate. So the low level of literacy led to the limited number of skilled people in the country, and that's why they could not participate in different activities that was needed, or that were needing the skills and the knowledge to be performed. So in one way or another, the production could be low because there is no skilled labor in the country. So it will be difficult for the country to achieve the economic development, because if there is maybe the agricultural officer or agriculturist must have the skills and the knowledge on how to provide advices on conducting modern or advanced agricultural sector or agriculture. But in fishing, there must be the specialists who have specialized in fishing activities. If it's just fishing officers, must be there. If they're just mining officers, must be there, means engineering. So, but the colonial education were left the majority of the people uneducated. So that made the lack of the skilled people in the country that could contribute to the increase or development of economy of Tanzania. But another is corruption or embezzlement of the government funds. It means that in Tanzania since independence have been facing the embezzlement or corruption of the government or public funds for their private benefits. Corruption is the one of the major factors that have hindered real development in Tanzania. Government officers, especially the presidents, have misused the public funds. Many governments in Africa, Tanzania inclusively, have run bankrupt because of the corruption and the mismanagement of the public funds. You can see that government officers have misused the public funds, whereby they allocated or located finances or funds to perpetuate different economic projects or economic sectors are just being used or utilized by the personal people or personal leaders to fulfill their benefits rather than truly using that money in developing the economic sectors in the nation. So that has become the problem of many leaders in Tanzania. Once they got the positions, they just forget where they came from and where they are going. So they forget on building the nation, while rather than they stick on benefiting themselves and their families. So in one way or another, our country cannot achieve the economic development, rather than we will remain poor and poor until we die. So the leaders, or as we youth, we have to change. Once we get the positions, we have to stick on building our nation, because our nation is just depend on the future. Or I mean the future nation is depend on the present actions of the leader. So as we youth and our leaders must behave and use the funds and public finance on the respective areas which is allocated by the budget to be perpetuated. So this will push our country to develop economically. But another, it is introduction of socialist ideology. Introduction of socialist ideology. At the time of independence, Tanzania chooses socialism and self-reliance. The government introduced the codes that were similar or common in the socialist world, including one-party system and common ownership of property. It means that the government introduced the codes that were similar or common in the socialist world, including one-party system and common ownership of property. This practice cut off Tanzania from the Western world, and the situation was worsening by the collapse of Soviet Union. It means that the introduction of socialist ideology, which concentrated on the major means of production to be owned by the government or by the majority in the country, that was worsened the situation in the country, because cut off it reduced the relation with the Western world to gain the assistance or economic assistance from those countries, specifically when the Soviet Union was collapsed in 1990. So you can see that Tanzania was experiencing a worse situation, whereby the economy was collapsed also because of the ideology which was adapted. But the another was massive unemployment. Massive unemployment is a situation thrown in the countries attempting to realize economic development. Many students who complete universities and the colleges do not get employment due to few job opportunities. To make matters worse, most of those who find higher education are job seekers and not job creators. And massive unemployment forces people to leave the country and brain drain. It means that you can see that almost the main students who graduate from universities and the colleges are the most who just seeking for employment. And in the country there is few positions to be to be provided for those who have completed. So what is next? The people just learn from the country and go in the outside to find or to seek for employment opportunities and let the country brain drain. And that situation will make the country to be not stepping ahead on the issue of economic development, because the educated ones are just rushing away from the country and going to seek the employment opportunities in the other countries where they will get the enough payments and getting the employment opportunities. And many who graduate are the one who seek the job and not the job creators. So in one way or another, the country cannot step ahead in the issue of development. So this is another problem that has been hindering the economic development in Tanzania since independence. But another is neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism has been the catastrophic problem in the development of Tanzania. Neo-colonialism is one of the major problems that hinder development in the country, as Tanzania depends on loans and grants from the developed countries, but these facilities have strings attached which are always to the advantage of the developed countries. To me, that the neo-colonialism under the umbrella of the direct investment or foreign investment, to me that the country are just being conditioned under the harsh conditions or principles, whereby the countries are forced to open the door for direct or foreign investments and the freedom of trade. So the countries are just placed under the high interest rates to be paid, and that will benefit the developed countries and not the country or Tanzania government. So that neo-colonialism, as Tanzania depends on loans and the grants from the developed country, will make the Tanzanian government or country to remain poor economically because of the dependence on the donor countries, rather than to depend on ourselves and to produce ourselves products. So these are some of the problems which have been hindering the development of economy in Tanzania since independence. So after there, I would like to go to see another part, which is the economic situation of Tanzania since independence. The economic situation of Tanzania since independence. In 1970s to 1980s, independence, many of African states faced the economic crisis whereby they failed to provide basic necessities to their people. It means that from 1970s, in many African states or countries, there have been many problems which have been facing the African states to provide the basic needs to their people, including Tanzania. During this time, foreign debt and the drought were the main factors that hindered economic development. Tanzania was also hit by the economic crisis of 1970s. There were various factors that contributed to the crisis in Tanzania as follows. To mean that during this time of 1970 to 1980s, there has been massive catastrophe that have been facing the development of economy in Tanzania, and that have been triggered by various reasons, such as the first one is long drought season. Long drought season to mean that Tanzania has been experiencing the long drought season. There was a prolonged drought in Tanzania, especially between 1981 and 1984. This drought hit the agricultural sector, which was the main sector of the economy, and there was a sharp fall in agricultural production, which affected the revenue earning of the country, since it depended on the export of agricultural products. It means that there was prolonged drought season in Tanzania, and that was affected much in the agricultural production, because many African countries, including Tanzania, are depending on agricultural sector as the backbone of the economy. So as the drought hit the Tanzanian government or Tanzanian country, as in agricultural production, it was collapsed, or there was a sharp fall in agricultural production, which affected the revenue earnings from the revenue earning of the country, since it depends on the exportation of raw materials resulted from agricultural production, like cotton, sisal, and other cash crops, which are exported to the abroad or to the European countries. So this has been contributed to the economic crisis in the Tanzania since independence. But another was the oil crisis of 1976. The oil crisis of 1976. The oil crisis of 1976 was the major factor that contributed to the economic crisis in Tanzania. There was an increase in oil price, which increased the cost of production, hence depleting the limited resources of the country. The resources spent on purchasing oil could have been used to finance other sectors of the economy. It means that 1976, this was the period when the Middle East, the main producer of the oil, was experiencing the war. So the transportation of oil in different parts of the world, including Africa, became worse, and that Tanzania was affected by that situation, and that led to the increase in price of oil resources in Africa. And that's why the government of Tanzania was spending a huge money, or a lot amount of money, in purchasing oil that could be used in other economic sectors. So in one way or another, has been brought the economic crisis in Tanzania since independence. But another one was the war against Idi Amin Dada that took place in 1978. It means that the war that was concentrated in fighting Idi Amin Dada as the dictator who made in Uganda, towards the fighting against Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who were fighting towards the Kagera region. It means that Idi Amin Dada was aiming at taking the control of Kagera. So that brought Kagera War of 1978. The war against Idi Amin is one of the factors that played a great role in causing the economic crisis in Tanzania. There was a full-scale war in 1978 between Tanzania and Uganda, whereby Tanzania spent a lot of resources financing the war, in which resources would have been used to finance the economy. And after the war, the economy of Tanzania had been shattered or declined, because the lot of finance was used to spend in the war, and to finance as well as to pay the soldiers who participated in the Kagera War to fight against Idi Amin Dada, who were aiming at taking over control of Kagera region. But another was the collapse of East African Community in 1977, worsened the economic crisis in Tanzania. The special treatment given to goods from Tanzania in the form of loan taxes was now removed. There was absence of secure market for Tanzanian goods. All these factors had allowed markets for Tanzanian goods were collapsed as the collapse of East African Community, which was aiming at cooperating in trading activities among the member states. So after the collapse of that community, the Tanzania was experiencing the economic crisis, as some goods which were produced in Tanzania lacked the market in the member states of East African communities like Kenya and Uganda. So that was another factor that led to the economic crisis in Tanzania. But another one was the nationalization of parastatal bodies. To mean that there was the introduction of the Arusha Declaration forced the government to nationalize parastatal bodies. Various enterprises were put under the government control, which in most cases failed to effectively administer the enterprises, hence leading to the collapse. To mean that the nationalization of the parastatal bodies to the control of the government failed to effectively supervise or administer that enterprises, and that led to the fall of that enterprises, as the economy of the country also collapsing, because these enterprises were no longer providing the revenue to the economy of Tanzania. But another one was the misuse of public offices. To mean that there was the misuse of the public office. The misuse of public office was one of the factors that have hindered development in Tanzania. Government officials have misused the public funds, hence the intended budget does not reach the required sectors of the economy. To mean that the leaders of the country have been misusing the public funds, which have been intended to perpetuate different economic sectors in the nation, and henceforth, or rather than by using that money in the located areas, they are just using that money for their benefits. So that also participated to contribute on the economic crisis in the country. So until there, I would like to wind up our session, and let me give you some questions. As I would like to wind up our lesson, or today's lesson, so I would like to give the exercise which has one question, and our question is: analyze the factors that led to the economic crisis in Tanzania since independence. So until there, this is mark the end of our today's lesson. So thank you for watching, and I wish you the good time, and I would like to welcome you to proceed learning with Edukea Tanzania, and welcome in the next period. Thank you.